All right, and shalom, shalom. So I want to welcome everybody to Oklahoma City King James Bible University. Then I'm Deacon Micah, and today then we have an interesting teaching today. So today then we're going to be going over this follow-up lesson, and it's titled "And There Were Baskets of Crumbs Afterwards." So this is just overall, then it's a response teaching to the Sabbath lesson that we had yesterday. And if you hadn't seen that, the link for it is in the description box. So, if you hadn't seen it, just go ahead and head back over there and look at it, because this is a follow-up response teaching. And if you want to know what's going on, you'll have to see that Sabbath lesson that happened. So once again, then the link for that is in the description box below. So for the people that have saw the lesson and you do realize that that was a very parabolic lesson, just about everything that was said, then it was in parables, to where then if you don't take the time to go back and think on it, you won't understand what's going on. And that's just the nature of those types of parabolic lessons. And it's even for me, where this lesson that we're getting ready to go through right now, then it just wasn't put together instantly. Then I had to go back and think about everything that was said. And after I put together my precepts, then I called to confirm, just to make sure that I was heading in the right direction. Then after I got that confirmation, then I continued putting this lesson together, and here we are today. So, we're getting ready to head on over to the preceptor and just going to share my research, and afterwards we'll put together the precept cheat sheet. And if you are in the Microsoft Teams class, then I'll be posting this file there so you can have it and you can go back and look at it for yourself. So let's go ahead and switch over. So now we are in the preceptor, and before then we get into the heart of this teaching and dive into it, then we have to look at this first box, which is a Fringe to Remember, and it's about this parabolic language. So we have Psalm 78:2 and Isaiah 28:11, and it reads, "So I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old. Reason why? For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people." And family, this is a fringe that every last one of us, and when we're doing our independent studies, or whether you're sitting before one of the elders or deacons, need to keep in mind that this book, that it is written in a parabolic language, and it's a lot of dark speeches, a lot of riddles, to where you have to be keeping this in your mind at all times and conditioning yourself to see things on the spiritual side. Otherwise, and you'll get that carnal understanding, you'll get lost and you won't understand what's going on. So we got to remember Psalm 78:2 and Isaiah 28:11. Furthermore, then we need to look at Numbers chapter 12, verse 6. And he said, "Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all my house." Because we know that there wasn't a prophet that had arose ever since Moses, and there won't be one that arise afterwards. "With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches." And if y'all recall, then there was one particular moment yesterday during Elder Johnson's lesson where somebody, they jumped the gun and they posted up an answer to a question that he had challenged towards the comment section. And he had clearly told us to think on it. We're not Moses. Thing with Moses is he got the full, complete understanding of what the Most High told him when he was sitting at the foot of the Most High. Us, then he's going to speak to us in dark speeches, parables, and riddles, and we have to keep the precepts diligently, and we also are going to have to think on things. Then we're not Moses. So once again, we'll look at verse 8. "With him," this is Moses, "will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches." Dark speeches, that's what we're getting. "And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the thing is we also have to keep this in mind. When you do certain things like that, where challenge questions, they're directed towards the comment section, and you just jump the gun, about a minute later, 5, 10 or so, then you're just answering the question and you hadn't thought on it, then you're carrying yourself as if you're Moses, whether you've said it or not. Because Moses, then he got the complete understanding of what the Lord was speaking to him without having to behold dark speeches and riddles. Then we're not Moses, then we have to think on things. So we'll look at this in Numbers chapter 12, verse 2. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Which that's what we do when we just move on forward and try and answer questions without giving it any thought, any sort of meditation. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Has he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. Which those two questions that Miriam, then she had asked, the answer for that, then it's in scripture, which we're getting ready to look at this right here. Deuteronomy 34:10. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Which, going to get ready to take that, and we'll bold it right there. So there are many prophets that are out there, but got to keep in mind the only one that the Lord knew face to face was Moses. So we'll go down and we'll look at Exodus 33:11. So this is another precept tying into that. And the Lord spoke unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. And he turned again into the camp, but his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. So that's another precept letting you know there that only Moses that he was dealing with face to face. Rest of us, then we're going to end up getting things in parables with Matthew chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. And hold on. All right, and then we have Matthew chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. So all these things spoke salvation unto the multitude, which you can picture yourself there, that multitude, in parables. And without a parable spoke he not unto them, which that goes for everything that's written in those scriptures, and it definitely then it has everything to do with that lesson that we seen yesterday. And every bit of what Elder Johnson and he was showing us during that Sabbath teaching, it was in parables. So then if you don't, once again, which I'm just repeating myself over and over, so we can get it to stick, you have to meditate on those parables and you got to think on it and you'll understand what's going on. And without a parable spoke he not unto them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world, which they're fulfilling this right here at the top. This Psalm 78:2. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old. So what we have to keep in mind is moving further on this right here. So we have 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 13 and 14, which things also we speak. And that was definitely with that Sabbath teaching, which Elder Johnson and he was teaching, not in the words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Holy Ghost teaches. So that's spiritual language. So comparing spiritual things, which that's these books in the Bibles and all of the parables, the riddles, all of the instructions with spiritual, with a spiritual understanding. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God. Carnal man needs not going to understand this, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. And this is definitely the case with many other parables in the Bible, such as, Adam and Eve and the serpent. If you're not looking at that spiritual, then it'll come off as a fairy tale. It's the same thing with Noah and the flood, and also with Peter's visions in the book of Acts, which tells you clearly there in chapter 10 that he had to think on that. And it's the same thing with the 5 loaves and the 5,000 men that we're getting ready to go into in this next box. You're not going to understand it, and if you're not discerning these things spiritually, which in order to discern it spiritually, then you have to put in the work. So this is the last precept we'll look at before we get ready to dive into this. But he, which this is that pivot point right here, but he, which you can put yourself there, that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High, and is occupied in the meditation thereof, will seek out the wisdom of all the ancient, and be occupied in prophecies. So then you'll know what you need to know then if you're meditating on this stuff. He will keep the sayings of the renowned men, so the books of the prophets that are in this Bible, and where subtle parables are, he will be there also. So you'll understand what's going on with those baskets and with the loaves of bread. He will seek out the secrets of grave sentences and be conversant in dark parables. All of this, then it's possible when you take the time to meditate and you give your mind over to study these things. So then I just wanted to make sure that, I touched base and, I explained that with all of us before we ended up moving into the heart of this teaching. And now we're getting ready to get to our next box. All right. So here we are. Now we're getting ready to talk about these 5 loaves of bread. So now we're at Matthew 14:14. And salvation went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. Which we have to take a step back and just chew on this for a minute. So we know that when you have big multitudes, it's going to be mixed. And just that right there, it says a whole lot. And, if you're well versed on these mixed multitudes, that's your answer right there to why there were so many crumbs after that feast that Yahushua had amongst those a great number of men. So in these multitudes, and you're going to have people that going to believe, and you're going to have people that are not going to believe. In a perfect idle scenario, then, we would have it to where everybody, they would be believers, but that's just not the case. Then there's going to be a mixed multitude there. So what we'll look at is we'll go to 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 20. So we'll pull a precept, which I don't know why I'm looking in the Old Testament, New Testament. So 2 Timothy chapter 2, and we'll go to verse 20. And here we are. But in a great house, which, just going back to Matthew 14:14, a great multitude, there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, which these are prepared and sanctified, these golds and silver, but also of wood and of earth. That's a full thought. It's a mixed multitude. And some to honor and some to dishonor. And that was exactly the same thing with the crowd that sat before Yahushua, for that feast that they had. You got to remember, when the Most High redeemed us out of Egypt, a mixed multitude went out. So we'll go to Exodus chapter 12, and we'll look at verse 38. So use this hand, and here we are. And a mixed multitude, which is Exodus 12 and 38, and a mixed multitude went up also with them. It's full thought. And flocks and herds and even very much cattle, which that was the same thing in Exodus, same thing that it is in the book of Matthew with this lesson that we're going over. And it's the same thing today in this present time. There's a mixed multitude there. And fortunately, I'm just going to say it now. It's even with, all Bible study groups to include even this one, there's a mixed multitude that's amongst us. How do I feel about it? It sucks, and I wish we wasn't a mixed multitude, but it is what it is, and that's just how things are. You're going to have believers and going to have non-believers there. You're going to have children of the spirit, children of the flesh amongst us, and sooner or later, then I'm going to end up doing a teaching on this too, this mixed multitude. But, I took us there so you can see this precept and how this is going to be pertaining to what's going on. So we'll look at Matthew 14:14 again. And salvation went forth and saw a great multitude, which that's a mixed multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick, which we're going to see how he did this. So we look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 45. You have heard that it has been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them, so you give wisdom to them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. So that's a full thought. That ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun so that light, that righteousness, to rise on the evil and on the good. See? Said mixed multitude. For he maketh his light to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. That's what Yahushua was doing. So in that great multitude, just as 2 Timothy 2:20 was saying, you have vessels of gold and silver. You also have vessels of wood and earth. Yahushua, then he was shining that light on the good and the evil that was there. Sending that rain upon the just and the unjust that's there. So he was giving wisdom to all of them, even the ones that had him separated in their heart. And the thing about that is you let the wheat and the tares, they're going to go together, and just regardless, at the very end, he's going to do the separating anyway, but everybody is going to get a chance to hear that gospel, and it's just up to us what you're going to do with it. So we look at this some more. Matthew chapter 24, verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, which the world is divided into 12 parts, for a witness unto all nations, the 12 tribes. That's what was going on when you look at that parable and that feast that he had before those thousands and thousands of men. Preaching the gospel out there, even amongst that mixed multitude, letting that sun and that rain, go forth upon the unjust and the just, the good and the evil, letting its gospel be preached into all of them, same way with all of us. And once all of us have received this message, and then the end shall come. It's full thought. And he's going to do the separating at the very end. So Matthew chapter 25, verse 32 and 33, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep, so as followers from the goats, the hard heads. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. So it's just showing you right there. And you want to be the sheep and not the goat. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. So they're going to be following his instructions, those precepts, those laws, statutes, and commandments. And it's the same exact thing with today, the same setup where this knowledge and it's being rained down upon us on abundance, upon this mixed multitude of the house of Israel. And at the very end, and he's going to do the separating. So we'll get ready to pivot into the next part of this lesson, and we'll look at Matthew chapter 14, verse 15 through 21. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, so this is a desert place, which that's just a wilderness, a desert, and it's just talking about a place where there's no bread, no water, no knowledge. And the time is now past. So send the multitude away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals, so to redeem themselves some meat, some food. So, before we go deeper into this, and I just want to make sure that I'm qualifying, what I'm saying with precepts. So we'll go over to the book of Numbers, and we'll go to 21 and 5. And we'll make sure that we all have the same understanding about this wilderness, this desert place. So getting ready to go over to Numbers 21 and 5. All right, so Numbers 21 and 5. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt, so out of confusion, to die in the wilderness? For there is no bread, describing what a wilderness is like. For there is no bread, neither is there any water. So no doctrine, no knowledge, and our soul loatheth this light bread. Which, this is interesting within itself. You have this mixed multitude, they're speaking against Moses and against the Most High, and not realizing that they were taken out of the wilderness and they're getting ready to go to a training site where there's going to be heavy bread, but because they're still inclined to the ways of Egypt, to confusion, they're loving darkness and they're despising the light. But, that's just beside the point. We'll also look at Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 6, to make sure that we understand how this wilderness, how to look at it. So here we are right here, book of Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 6. Neither said they, where is the Spirit of God that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, so confusion, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and pits, because there's no water there, through a land of drought and of the shadow of death, through a land that no man passeth through, and where no man dwelt. So I'm just making sure that I'm touching all bases, just making sure that we understand what a wilderness is. And it's just a place where there's no bread and no water. And if you want to see a wilderness, you just look around your surroundings where you're at right now, then it's wilderness. So what we'll do is we'll pick up where we had left off. So we were at Matthew 14 and 15 and 21. So, but salvation said unto them, they need not depart. So you give them to eat. So you give them knowledge and doctrine to learn. And they said unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, bring them hither to me. So you're getting ready to feed these multitudes of men with these 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And this would bring us to another point. So elder, then he asks during his Sabbath lesson, how is this possible that with 5 loaves of bread can afterwards the disciples, and they gather baskets and collect 12 baskets full of crumbs, and you only had 5 loaves to feed over 5,000 people? That's a valid question, and that'll end up running you back to what we started off with in this left box. So we'll look at 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 13 and 14. So my mouse, and it's over here in this left box now. Which things also we speak, not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Ghost teacheth, comparing spiritual things, which that's the 1611 in its entirety, with spiritual. So with the spiritual breakdown, a spiritual understanding. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. If you're looking at this with a carnal mindset, you won't understand it. Neither can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. So now I'm back in the middle box. Thing is when Elder asks that question, how is it possible for 12 baskets full of crumbs to be collected after a feast that involved over 5,000 people, about 5,000 people, with only 5 loaves? How is that possible? If you're looking at this carnally, there's no way that you're going to collect that many baskets full of crumbs from 5 loaves if you're looking at this according to the flesh. Now, then, if you are looking at this spiritually, you can. Because those 5 loaves, that's talking about knowledge, doctrine. So, what we're going to end up looking at these 5 loaves of bread that he had. So, I'm getting ready to show them to you. So now we're getting ready to go to the book of Luke, and we'll go to chapter 16, verse 29. So Luke and 16, take my hand so we can go down here, and now we'll find it right here. So Luke chapter 16, verse 29. And Abraham said unto him, they have Moses and the prophets, which that's a full thought. And this is the part of 16 and 29 that I wanted to show you. So they have Moses and the prophets. So Moses, and you have to understand how that word functions, and it's word of truth. That's how it was possible for all of those crumbs to be gathered up after a feast like that with only 5 loaves. Because those 5 loaves of bread, and you're not looking at that carnally, you're looking at that as that's the word of truth. And now getting ready to show you these 5 loaves that they had. So this is loaf number 1. So let's go here. That's the first loaf of bread right there. The first book of Moses, called Genesis. So that's bread loaf number 1. Now we're getting ready to look at bread loaf number 2. The second book of Moses, called Exodus. Now getting ready to look at bread loaf number 3. The third book of Moses, called Leviticus. Now getting ready to look at bread loaf number 4. The fourth book of Moses, called Numbers. Now we're getting ready to look at that 5th loaf of bread. The 5th book of Moses, called Deuteronomy. So when you look at this with that spiritual understanding, it eliminates that fairy tale when you look at things carnally. So spiritually, with knowledge, it's possible with 5 loaves of bread, which these 5 books, to feed that many people. It's the same way with right now. There's 72 people watching this right now, and y'all are being fed with bread, not carnally, spiritually. So now we're getting ready to continue where we left off, and we're going to pick back up in the book of Matthew chapter 14, and we'll look at 19 through 21. And he commanded the multitude, which you have to remember that this is a mixed multitude, to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves, which you just remember what that is spiritually, and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, so they were all learning, and were filled. And they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. So all of this remnants of that feast that they had. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men. So that's MEN too when you look at this. So that's 5,000 men. beside women and children. So if you factor in the women and the children, that number goes up even more. So it just makes every bit of sense that those 5 loaves, and that's talking about knowledge, can't be carnal physical bread. So just to qualify that some more, besides, what I showed you out of that e-Bible, we're going to pull up another box to qualify that this bread and it's this knowledge and not anything carnal. So now we're in the third box, and this is something that Elder had showed us that he ran in this lesson. So John chapter 4, verse 31 and 32. In the meanwhile, his disciples prayed him, saying, So, Master, eat. But he said unto them, I have meat, so bread to eat that you know not of. Because, they were understanding and conversing from a carnal perspective, and he was responding back to them with spiritual perspective. And it run us right back to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14 again. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. So, when you're dealing with Yahushua and with all of these other prophets that's in the 1611, you have to be prepared to look at these things spiritually. So we'll look at this meat that he was talking about the whole time that they knew not of. So here we are right here with these next 3 precepts. So we have Proverbs chapter 9, verse 4 through 5. So whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanted understanding, so that knowledge, she saith to him, So come, eat of my bread, that understanding up here, and drink of the wine which I have mingled, because that bread, then that's knowledge. So Sirach 15 and 3. With the bread of understanding shall she feed him, and give him the water of wisdom to drink. And just a couple of minutes ago, then I was showing y'all some precepts that attributed the wilderness, where wilderness, and it's just a place where there's no bread, no water. Now you know what that bread and that water is, and it's that wisdom, understanding. That's what Yahushua, those 5 loaves, was talking about the entire time. And when you know what the 5 loaves are, then you should understand what those crumbs are. So we have also John chapter 6, verse 33. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. Which that life, that's that word, then that's coming to us to straighten us out, to sanctify us, to get us ready for Christ. And we have John chapter 6, verse 51. So I am the living bread which came down from heaven. So this is Christ speaking. If any man learn of this bread, which that's the bread that he fed those multitudes with, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world, which you just have to remember that the world is divided into 12 parts. If, there's any Christians, the first time being at this channel, when you look at world, it's divided into 12 parts. So before we pull up the 4th box, just looking at the comment section, just want to make sure that everybody is tracking along with everything that was said so far, because this 4th box, we're getting ready to go into some deep, deep, deep water. So I'm asking the comment section now, is there anybody that is lost, not tracking along? Then I need to know now before we get in that 4th box. So I'm just going to wait a second and see what we all have to say. Okay, so thank you, Brother Samson. You got it. A plain brother. Let's see what going well much. What was John again? Okay, so I'm going to have to go back and find that scripture for you. So everything is crystal. It's very clear. That's good. That's what I want to see. Great. I'm good. Deacon. Good. Okay. So was asking me what was John again. So the verses that I ran for John, we have 6 and 33. We have John chapter 6, verse 51. Let me go up just in case. May have. And this is that other one. So John chapter 4, verse 31 and 32. So this is the one that Elder had used in that Sabbath lesson. And let me make sure that there's not another John verse in the second box. Okay, it's definitely not that one that you're asking about. Okay, so, yep, so it's John chapter 4, verse 31 and 32. And we also use John 6 and 33 and John 6 and 51, which all of this, and I'm going to be showing this again in the Precept cheat sheet right at the very end. So, okay, so, all right. Before Proverbs. Okay, so yeah, that was it. So John chapter 4, verse 31 and 32. Okay, so good. All right, so now we're getting ready to take these boxes down, and we're going to look at the last box. So now we're getting ready to go into some deep water. All right, and this is all we need now. This is final box. So now we're going to revisit Matthew chapter 14, verse 20 and 21. And they did all eat, so they were learning, and were filled. And they took up fragments that remained 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And thing about this is you got to remember that he fed a mixed multitude. That's why you have all of these fragments from that feast that remained afterwards. Otherwise, if they were taking it seriously, there should have been no crumbs afterwards. Then it should have been like that finger licking, just should have ate all of that and should have been nothing on a plate. So this is not good, that there were fragments remaining of that feast. So we have John chapter 6, verse 12. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, so gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. So they're gathering up all of these other crumbs that remain from that feast. And now we're getting ready to look into this some more. So we have Exodus chapter 16, verse 4, and this is going to get ready to be our pivot point going into this deep water. Then said the Lord unto Moses, remember, I will rain bread from heaven for you, which that's a full thought. We just seen what that bread was, so I'm actually going to pull this other box back up. And we seen it in John chapter 6, verse 51. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. So we go back over to Exodus 16 and 4. Remember, I will rain bread from heaven for you, so this knowledge. And the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. And going back over to that multitude that Yahushua fed, the reason why there were crumbs remaining after that feast that he did before them is because you had some that did not gather their certain rate for that day. But you also had the believers that gathered their rate, but the mixed multitude, those unbelievers that did not gather their certain rate. Otherwise, there would have been no crumbs there. This is the point that I'm trying to drive, and with these final precepts, we're getting ready to see this. So now we're getting ready to go to Exodus chapter 16, verse 16 through 20. So this is a thing which the Lord had commanded. Gather of it, so of this knowledge, every man according to his learning, an omer, for every man according to the number of your persons. So take ye every man for them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so, and gathered some more, some less. So family, then you have your pens and pencils. We need to write down this omer. And, for this omer, what I want you to write down is this. So that omer is according to your ability. Then that's your full ability of how much knowledge you're going to retain. Well, not retain, that you're going to gather for that day. So when you're gathering an omer, then you're gathering to your maximum ability for that day. So, to look at it, you'll see it this way. Just think of it as you had both of your hands wide open. So you have both of your hands open before you, and let's say I was pouring out seeds in both of your hands. That omer for you is going to be exactly how much both of your hands can hold. That full capacity, that maximum amount of how much you can hold in both of your hands, that's your omer. And your omer, then it's going to be different than everybody else's. So your omer, then it's going to be more than the next man's, but it's also going to be less than somebody else's. But your omer, then it's going to fill you up, and that's your maximum rate. So going back over to Exodus chapter 16, verse 16, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Gather of it every man according to his learning. An omer, that's what that is, according to your learning. For every man, so man, according to the number of your persons. So take ye every man for them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so. So they're gathering according to their learning, their omer, and gathered, some more, some less. So also when we're sitting before the elders and other channels learning, some of us, we're going to gather in more treasures than the next person. Sometimes it'll be less, but you gathered your omer. You're not going to lack, nor will you go over. Then you gathered your rate. And the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is we have to go back up to Matthew chapter 14, verse 20. If everybody amongst that multitude was gathering and learning and taking in their omer, there would have been no fragments there. Then when those disciples would have went looking around to collect crumbs, they would have found none, because everybody would have gathered their omer. So we're getting ready to continue looking at this some more. So now we're going back to Exodus 16, and now we're going to look at 18 through 20. And when they did measure it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over. Because that omer, once again, and that's your rate. So he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. That's a full thought, and it's getting ready to explain why. So they gathered every man according to his learning. So that's that omer once again. And Moses said, let no man leave of it, so this knowledge, till the morning. So you gather your omer. Then you don't go, cutting yourself short. But unfortunately, that's what happened with that multitude that sat before Yahushua. And it was also in this silhouette example in Exodus. Let's look at verse 20. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses, full thought. This is why. But some of them, which that's that mixed multitude, but some of them left of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stink. So that bred that knowledge. And Moses was wroth with them. Reason why? Because you had those hardheads amongst that mixed multitude that did not gather their omer. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been stuff left out there. So once again, but some of them left of it until the morning, which these people that left of it, they did not gather their omer. And it bred worms and stinked. And Moses was wroth with them. And looking at the comment section, is anybody confused on this omer so far? I'd have to ask this before we get any deeper. So I just asking a question about the omer. Is everybody understood about that omer? Okay. Hey, we have two that said no. So, okay, so gonna take care of that. All right. So, getting ready to go down some more. So, we have Exodus chapter 16, verse 36, and Genesis 28 and 22. So, now an omer is the 10th part of an ephah, which that ephah, then that's just talking about fine flour, knowledge. So, that omer, then once again, then that's your full rate. So, every day, then we're going to be increasing in this knowledge and understanding. And the amount that you're increasing day in and day out, that's your omer. Then your omer, then once again, then it's going to be different than the next man's omer. Then it may be less and it may be more. But when you're gathering in your omer, you're gathering in that maximum rate that you're going to take in for that day. If you're not gathering in your omer, then that means that you are leaving stuff behind. You're leaving crumbs behind. And you're not taking in that portion of that bread that you're supposed to be gathering in for that day. So let's look at this. Now, an omer is the 10th part of an ephah of fine flour. So that's your portion of that knowledge. And we'll look at this right here. So Genesis chapter 28, verse 22. And this stone, so that truth, as we know that Yahushua, salvation, the anointed Christ, and that's the chief cornerstone, which I have set for a pillar, so for a place, shall be God's house, which we know spiritually, then we are the temple of God, and his spirit dwells in us. And of all that thou shalt give me, which now then I'm gonna park back and just, talk about the second, take my time with the second part. And of all that thou shalt give me, so this rate of knowledge, I will surely give the omer unto thee. So that omer, then that's all of that knowledge that you're going to gather in for that specific day. And what you're supposed to be doing with that omer is you take that rate of knowledge, that portion that you're increasing in for that day, you put it in your temple, you retain it, and that's your 10th. That's that tithe right there, which the Christian pastors and teachers, and they say all this 10th, and that's 10% of your income. No, the 10th, you just go right back to Exodus chapter 16 and verse 36. An omer is the 10th part of an ephah. That 10th part is that rate that you're going to increase in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Then it's as much as you're going to retain and take in and increase in for that day, that's your omer. So, now that let me look through this and see if, okay, so Willie Miller, then he said he was good. Was somebody else that said they was Andre Gaynor. So Andre, then I just want to ask once again to see, are you understood on this? And if the answer is still no, then I'm going to just ask Elder Johnson to go on ahead and set up a Zoom meeting. Just put the link in the description box. Well, not in the description, in the comments. And after this teaching, we'll go into Zoom. So, okay. So he's good. Okay. All right. So going back to Genesis chapter 28 and verse 22. So in this stone, so that chief cornerstone, that knowledge which I have set for a place, shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, so all that you're going to increase in for that day, I will surely give the 10th. So you're giving that omer back unto thee. That's how that tithe works. And that's what the multitude was supposed to be doing with Yahushua that set before him. We go back up to Exodus chapter 16, verse 20, right here. Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto Moses. That's a full thought. This is why. But some of them in that mixed multitude left of it until the morning. They did not gather their rate, and it bred worms and stinked, because you left that bread on the ground, and it's polluted now. And Moses was wroth with them. It's the same thing with up here in Matthew chapter 14, verse 20 and 21. And they did all eat. So this mixed multitude, they were all learning and were filled. And they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. If everybody amongst that multitude was gathering their omer, there would have been no fragments there. That's the point. So we're getting ready to go down and now start to look at some precepts as to why. So actually before that, a couple of other precepts wanted to revisit. So then said the Lord unto Moses, so remember, I will rain bread from heaven for you, so this knowledge, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day. That certain rate, that's that omer, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. And what he's talking about is in Deuteronomy 14 and 22. So thou shalt truly tithe. So you're offering all the increase of thy seed, of that word. Seed is the word of God, that the field bringeth forth year by year. So that's how he's proving you. And when you're getting that certain rate rained on you, you have to retain that and you offer that back. That's that tithe. But, you know, Christian and Christianity and all of these other denominations, they'll tell you something else. And it's sad, but this is why you meditate on the word and you keep the precepts so you won't get taken by these floods of false doctrines out there. So there's a couple of questions that I typed up for us to ponder on. So how can you do this so you truly, sincerely tighten all of the increase of thy seed of that word if you are leaving crumbs behind? So once again, I'll ask it again. So how can you do this if you are leaving crumbs behind? If you're leaving fragments of this omer that you're supposed to be gathering in, how can you tithe all the increase of thy seed? Second, how can you do this if you attempt to bring God fruits of the ground? Which what happens is if you leave that bread out on the ground, it's going to end up bread and worms and stinking. It's polluted now. And you go and try and take that bread up off of the ground and you offer it back to the Spirit of God, you're offering him polluted bread. Which if you're doing that, you're not truly, sincerely tithing all the increase of the seed. So let's look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 7. Malachi, excuse me. So Malachi chapter 1, verse 7. So you offer polluted bread upon mine altar. You don't want to do that. And when you leave that bread out there on the ground, it's going to breed worms and stink. So you offer polluted bread upon my altar, and you say, wherein have we polluted thee? And that ye say, the table of the Lord is contemptible. So you don't go offering him no polluted bread. So now we'll move on some more. So this is why there were crumbs left behind. Gotta remember that mixed multitude. So the first reason why is this right here. So Numbers chapter 11, verse 4 through 5. And the mixed multitude that was among them, that was also before Yahushua during that feast that he did amongst all of those thousands of men. And the mixed multitude that was among them fell a lusting. That's why. That's one of the reasons why. And the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? So you're still holding on to the ways of Egypt instead of taking in that omer of this manna. Then you want flesh instead of manna. So we remember the fish, so this knowledge of Egypt, which we did eat in Egypt freely. It's a full thought. The cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. And all of that, then that's spiritual. And the thing with every last one of these items, so the cucumbers, melons, and leeks, and onions, and garlic, haven't y'all noticed that they all have a tart that bitter taste to it, then they're holding on to this knowledge of Egypt, this bitter knowledge. But now our soul is dried away. There's nothing at all beside this manna before our eyes. So this mixed multitude that was fell a lusting, they're lusting after the knowledge and the ways of Egypt, of confusion, and they're speaking evil about that bread that Christ was raining down from heaven for us. So they're still holding on to the ways of Egypt. That'll cause you to end up leaving crumbs behind, and you're not gathering your armor. So let's look at Judith chapter 5, verse 11. So therefore the king of Egypt rose up against them and dealt subtility with them and brought them low with laboring in brick and made them slaves. Which when we look at dealt subtility, just think about Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, and how that serpent and he dealt subtly with Adam. Two-tongued doctrine. He's out there with that flood of doctrines to catch you up. And it's the same way with the king of Egypt. So therefore the king of Egypt rose up against them, our forefathers, and dealt subtility with them and brought them down low with laboring in brick and made them slaves, which we know that carnally, you look at slaves and that's just going into captivity. You look at it spiritually, you become a slave when you're in bondage to confusion, to Babylon, to this false doctrine. So let's look at this some more. So Exodus chapter 1, verse 14. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar, so the false doctrine, and in brick, which this false image, and in all manner of service in the field. And all their service when they made them serve was with rigor. So that mixed multitude that fell a lusting, they're still holding on to these bitter things up here in Numbers chapter 11, verse 5. The cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. So these bitter things. You go back to Exodus 1 and 14 once again, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar. So this false doctrine, and in brick. So this false image, and in all manner of service in the field, and all their service when they made them serve was with rigor. So you go further in scripture, and now then I'm going to show you how this mortar and this brick, then it's how it functions out in Precept. So we have Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 28. And her prophets, so these false prophets out here, have daubed them with untempered mortar. So there's that mortar again. So seeing vanity and divining lies unto them. So it's that false doctrine, that lying divination, saying, thus saith the Lord God, when the Lord has not spoken. So that was one way how, our forefathers, their lives were being made bitter, so spiritually over there in Egypt. So that mortar, that's false doctrine. And now we'll look at Isaiah chapter 65, verse 3. So a people that provoketh me to anger continually to my face. It's full thought. So that sacrifice in gardens. So you're in all of these different gardens up underneath all of these different green trees, and burneth incense upon altars of brick. Which we go over to Exodus chapter 20, verse 24. The only altar we were supposed to be making for the Spirit of God was that altar of stone. So that altar of truth, which I did a teaching on that. So you're building up your temple, you're building it up on whole stones, so truth. But they're in these altars of brick. So we're going to end up looking at this. So we'll go over to the book of Exodus, and we'll look at this just to make sure that we all see this. So we're in the book of Exodus. So let me go to chapter 20, verse 24. This is the altar. that we were supposed to be making. An altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and shalt sacrifice therein thy burnt offerings. That altar, then that's you. And thy peace offerings, thy sheep and thine oxen, in all places where I record my way. So my name, which we noted he recorded his way in Jerusalem, I will come unto thee, and I will bless thee, so give thee wisdom. This is the altar of earth, of stone. But there, which we go back over here in Isaiah 65:3, altars of brick. So you've made these houses of these false images, which we already know in Acts chapter 7, verse 48. God, then he doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. And those altars of bricks, those images in there, that has nothing to do with what's in the 1611. But this is what that mixed multitude, some of them was holding on to, that was sitting before Yahushua, causing them not to be able to gather that omer, still holding on to the ways and the knowledge of Egypt. So we'll look at Genesis chapter 11, verse 3. And they said one to another, so go to, and let us make brick, so these images, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone. So you have these images instead of this truth. And slime had they for mortar. So that's one of the reasons why. Another one that we'll look at is Luke chapter 8, verse 5 through 8. So we have a parable. So a sower went out to sow his seed, so that word. And as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trodden down, and the fowls of the air devoured it. Which we know that fowl, then that's just a creature, and the thing that you want to focus on with those fowls is the wings, the strength. Then the strength of that fowl is in its wings. And we know in Leviticus 11:46 through 47, there are clean fowls out there and there are unclean fowls out there. You have to watch who you learn from, which we'll go and look at it real quick. So we go to Leviticus chapter 11, verse 46 and 47. Just to make sure we all see this. So, all right. So, this is the law of the beasts, and of the fowl, and of every living creature that moveth in the waters, and of every creature that creepeth upon the earth, to make a difference between the unclean and the clean, and between the beasts that may be learnt and the beasts that may not be eaten, so not learnt of. Thing is that sower, and he went and sowed his seed, and some fell by the wayside, and it was trodden down, and the fowls of the air devoured it. And some fell upon a rock, and as soon as it sprung up, it withered away because it lacked moisture. So you had some crumbs that fell here too. And then you have some in verse 7, and some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it and choked it. And some, the other part of this multitude, fell on good ground and sprang up and bare fruit, so works 100-fold. And when he had said these things, he cried, and he that has ears to hear, let him hear. So, getting ready to show this last precept, and we have Luke chapter 8, verse 12 through 15. So, getting ready to get the breakdown, the understanding of it. So, those by the wayside are they that hear. Then cometh the devil, which we know that the devil, then he's spirit, and he's same way that the Most High works through people, Satan, and he works through people too, which these unclean fowls that we're not supposed to be learning of. Then cometh the devil, and taketh away the word out of their hearts, lest they should believe and be saved. So you had some crumbs that was wasted amongst this group. They on the rock are they which, when they hear, receive the word with joy. And these have no root, which reason why, which for a while, for a moment they believe, and in time of temptation fall away. So amongst this group, then you had crumbs that was wasted there, and that which fell among thorns are they which when they have heard, so go forth, and are choked with cares, so you're worried about carnal things, and riches and pleasures of this life, and bring no fruit to perfection. So you had some crumbs that was wasted there. And then you have the contrary side. So the good part of that mixed multitude. But that on the good ground are they which in an honest and good heart, having heard the word, keep it, and bring forth fruit with patience. So, family, the thing is you just have to remember, reason why those fragments were being gathered up is because there was a mixed multitude that was sitting before salvation when he taught them. Otherwise, wouldn't have been no fragments there. And what we have to keep in mind personally is you just make sure that, these distractions, these things out here, you don't let them prevent you from gathering in your certain rate and retaining it. And that's what you have to think about from that lesson. So before then we end up heading on out, then I wanted to do the Precept cheat sheets. So right at the top, which I'm going to take this box down, then I have the Precept cheat sheets. So, if you want to write this stuff down and meditate on it, look at it again, getting ready to go through this. So the first section that you want to write out is the Fringes to Remember. So that was the first box. And the precepts we have is Psalms 78 and 2. We have Isaiah 28 and 11. We have Numbers 12 and 6 through 8. We have Numbers 12 and 2. And Deuteronomy 34 and 10. Exodus 33 and 11. Matthew 13 and 34 and 35. And 2 Corinthians 12 and 13 and 14. And Sirach 39 and 1 through 3. So this is what you want to write down for that first section. And also then if you have like a smartphone or a cell phone, just to take pictures, you can just snap this entire thing and it'll make it even quicker. But otherwise, for the people that strictly pen and pencil, this is what you want to write down for the Fringes to Remember. Next part that you need to remember and write down for you to meditate and go back on is this mixed multitude. So for this, you want to write down Matthew chapter 14, verse 14. You also want to write down Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 45. And you want to write Matthew chapter 25, verse 32 and 33. When you want to go back and look at that multitude that Yahushua taught in front of, you got to remember once again, the light, the sun, and it's going to shine on the godly and the sinner, the just and the unjust. Now, and the third part is this bread. So spiritual. So to understand those 5 loaves, then you want to look at John chapter 4, verse 31 and 32. So you want to look at that. You want to look at Proverbs chapter 9, verse 4 through 5. And you want to look at Sirach 15 and 3, John 6 and 33, and also John 6 and 51. So this is for that spiritual understanding of bread. And then the fourth one, why the crumbs were there. So this is the heart of the teaching right here. So for the verses that you want to meditate on, you want to look at Matthew chapter 14, verse 20 through 21. You want to look at Exodus chapter 16, verse 16 through 20, which this one I'm going to highlight it because this one is one of those heavy hitters right there. You also want to look at Numbers 11 and 4 through 5, and Judith chapter 5, verse 11, Exodus chapter 1, verse 14, Ezekiel 22 and 28. You want to look at Isaiah 65 and 3, Genesis 11 and 3, and you also want to look at Luke chapter 8, verse 5 through 8, and Luke chapter 8, verse 12 through 15. So that's for why the crumbs were there. And then for that Omer, which this is the fifth section, that 10th part, that Omer, which I'll actually just write that in parentheses, so that 10th part is the Omer. You want to look at Exodus chapter 16, verse 4, Exodus chapter 16, verse 16 through 20. You want to look at Exodus 16 and 36, Genesis chapter 28, verse 22, and you want to look at Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22. So these are the things that you want to write down and list down, and you just go back and meditate on it. And if at any time, you still have any questions, comments, concerns, just leave it in the comment section of this lesson. Before I head on out, then I'm going to ask the comment section one last time. Is everybody understood what's going on? Is anybody lost, confused? Do we need to go in the back, go to Zoom? All right, so I'm just waiting. So understood. So Sister Rosie Kirby, then understood. All right. As I'm just want to make sure that everybody is clear. Nobody is having any sort of reservations, not understanding what's going on. Okay. Well, till next time, family, then I just bid you all then a shalom and peace.